In sooth, I know not why I am so sad. That is the first line of Shakespeare's comedy, The Merchant of Venice. It's spoken by Antonio, the wealthy Christian merchant of the play's title. Antonio's been successful in business, and over the years, he's lent a considerable amount of money to his dear friend, Bassanio. Bassanio has squandered his own fortune, and now he needs a bit more money in order to woo the rich and brilliant Portia of Belmont. Antonio immediately agrees to help, but all his money is tied up in merchandise at sea. He expects the ships to return soon, filling his coffers. So in the meantime, he goes to the Jewish moneylender Shylock to furnish him with the sum. Shylock is surprised to see Antonio.
Signor Antonio, many a time and oft in the Rialto you have rated me about my monies and my usances. Still, I have borne it with a patient shrug, for sufferance is the badge of all our tribe. You call me misbeliever, cutthroat dog, and spit upon my Jewish gabardine, and all for use of that which is mine own. Well then, it now appears you need my help. Go to then. You come to me and you say, Shylock, we would have monies, you say so. You that did void your room upon my beard, and foot me as you spurn a stranger cur over the threshold. Monies is your suit. What should I say to you? Should I not say, hath a dog money? Is it possible a cur can lend 3,000 ducats? Or shall I bend low and in a bondman's key, with bated breath and whispering humbleness, say this? Fair sir, you spat on me on Wednesday last. You spurned me such a day. Another time you called me dog, and for these courtesies I'll lend you thus much money.
I am as like to call thee so again, to spit on thee again, to spurn thee too. If thou wilt lend this money, lend it not as to thy friends, for when did friendship take a breed for barren metal of his friend? But lend it rather to thine enemy, who if he break, thou mayst with better face exact the penalty.
Why, look you how you scorn. I would be friends with you and have your love. Forget the shames that you have spurned me with. Supply your present wants, and take no doit of usance for my monies. And you'll not hear me. This is kind I offer.
This were kindness.
This kindness will I show. Go with me to a notary. Seal me there your single bond, and in a merry sport, if you repay me not on such a day, at such a place, such sum or sums as are affected in the contract, let the forfeit be nominated for an equal pound of thy fair flesh, to be cut off and taken, and at what part of your body pleaseth me.
Content, in faith, I'll seal to such a bond, and say there is much kindness in the Jew.
Shall not seal to such a bond for me. I rather dwell in my necessity.
Fear not, man, I will not forfeit it. Within these 2 months, that's a month before this bond expires, I do expect return of thrice 3 times the value of this bond. So Bassanio takes the 3,000 ducats, travels to Belmont, and wins Portia's heart. Meanwhile, Shylock's daughter, Jessica, steals money from her father and elopes with another one of Antonio's friends. Jessica also travels to Belmont, where Portia and Bassanio are married. But Bassanio soon receives some bad news. Antonio's ships are reported to have been wrecked at sea, and his bond to Shylock is forfeit. Shylock drags Antonio before the Duke of Venice to extract his pound of flesh. Bassanio rushes to Antonio's side in the courtroom, not knowing that Portia is coming to the rescue.
What, is Antonio here?
Ready, so please your grace.
I am sorry for thee. Thou art come to answer a stony adversary, an inhuman wretch incapable of pity, void and empty of any dram of mercy.
I have heard your grace hath ta'en great pains to qualify his rigorous course. But since he stands obdurate, and that no lawful means can carry me out of his envy's reach, I do oppose my patience to his fury, and am armed to suffer with a quietness of spirit the very tyranny and rage of his.
Go one and call the Jew into the court.
He is ready at the door. He comes, my lord.
Make way and let him stand before our face. Shylock. The world thinks, and I think so too, that thou but leadst this image of thy malice to the last hour of act. And then thou'lt show thy mercy and remorse more strange than is this strange apparent cruelty. And where thou mayest exact the penalty, which is a pound of this poor merchant's flesh, thou wilt not only lose the forfeiture, but, touched with human gentleness and love, forgive a moiety of the principal, glancing an eye of pity on his losses, which have of late so huddled on his back enough to press a royal merchant down, and pluck commiseration of his state from brassy bosoms and hard hearts of flint, from stubborn Turks and Tartars, never trained to offices of tender courtesy. We all expect a gentle answer. Jew.
I have possessed your grace of what I purpose, and on our holy Sabbath I have sworn to have the due and forfeit of my bond. If you deny it, let the danger light upon your contract and your city's freedom. You'll ask me why I rather choose to have a weight of carrion flesh than to receive 3,000 ducats. I'll not answer that. But say it is my humor. Is it answered? What if my house be troubled with a rat, and I be pleased to give 10,000 ducats to have it baned? What? Are you answered yet? Some men there are love not a gaping pig, some that are mad when they behold a cat, and others, when the bagpipe sings in the nose, cannot contain their urine. For affection, master of passion, sways it to the mood of what it likes or loathes. Now, for your answer. As there is no firm reason to be rendered why he cannot abide a gaping pig, why he a harmless necessary cat, why he a woolen bagpipe, but of force must yield to such inevitable shame as to offend, himself being offended. So can I give no reason, nor I will not, more than a lodged hate and a certain loathing I bear Antonio, that I follow thus a losing suit against him. Is it answered?
This is no answer, thou unfeeling man, to excuse the current of thy cruelty.
I'm not bound to please thee with my answers.
Do all men kill the things they do not love?
Hates any man the thing he would not kill?
Not every offense is a hate at first.
What? Wouldst thou have a serpent sting thee twice?
I pray you, think your question with the Jew. You may as well go stand upon the beach and bid the main flood bate his usual height. You may as well use question with the wolf why he hath made the ewe bleat for the lamb. You may as well forbid the mountain pines to wag their high tops and to make no noise when they are fretting with the gusts of heaven. You may as well do anything most hard as seek to soften that than which what's harder, his Jewish heart. Therefore, I do beseech you, make no more offers, use no farther means, but with all brief and plain conveniency, let me have judgment, and the Jew his will.
For thy 3,000 ducats, here is 6.
If every ducat of 6,000 ducats were in 6 parts, and every part a ducat, I would not draw them. I would have my bond.
How shalt thou hope for mercy, rendering none?
What judgment should I dread, doing no wrong? You have among you many a purchased slave, who, like your asses and your dogs and mules, you use in abject and in slavish parts because you bought them. Shall I say to you, let them be free? marry them to your heirs. Why sweat they under burdens? Let their beds be made as soft as yours, and let their palates be seasoned with such viands. You will answer, the slaves are ours. So do I answer you. The pound of flesh that I demand of him is dearly bought. 'Tis mine, and I will have it. If you deny me, fie upon your law. There is no force to the decrees of Venice. I stand for judgment. Answer, shall I have it?
Upon my power, I may dismiss this court, unless Bellario, a learned doctor whom I have sent for to determine this, come here today.
Good cheer, Antonio. What, man? Courage yet! The Jew shall have my flesh, blood, bones, and all, ere thou shalt lose for me one drop of blood.
I am a tainted wether of the flock meetest for death. The weakest kind of fruit drops earliest to the ground, and so let me. You cannot better be employed, Bassanio, than to live still and write mine epitaph.
Why dost thou whet thy knife so earnestly?
To cut the forfeiture from that bankrupt there.
Not on thy soul, but on thy soul, harsh Jew, thou makest thy knife keen. But no metal can, no, not the hangman's axe, bear half the keenness of thy sharp envy. Can no prayers pierce thee?
No, none that thou hast wit enough to make.
This letter from Bellario doth commend a young and learned doctor of laws to our court. Your grace shall understand that the receipt of your letter I am very sick. But in the instant that your messenger came, in loving visitation was with me a young doctor of Rome. His name is Balthazar. I acquainted him with the cause in controversy between the Jew and Antonio the merchant. We turned o'er many books together. He is furnished with my opinion, which, bettered with his own learning, the greatness whereof I cannot enough commend, comes with him at my importunity to fill up your grace's request in my stead. I beseech you, let his lack of years be no impediment to let him lack a reverent estimation, for I never knew so young a body with so old a head. You hear the learned Bellario, what he writes? And here I take it is the doctor come. Give me your hand. Come you from old Bellario?
I did, my lord.
You're welcome. Take your place. You are acquainted with the difference in question in the court?
I'm informed thoroughly of the cause. Which is the merchant here and which the Jew?
Antonio and old Shylock both stand forth.
Is your name Shylock?
Shylock is my name.
Of a strange nature is the suit you follow. Yet in such rule that the Venetian law cannot impugn you as you do proceed. You stand within his danger, do you not?
Aye, so he says.
Do you confess the bond?
I do.
Then must the Jew be merciful?
On what compulsion must I? Tell me that.
The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, an attribute to awe and majesty wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptred sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. An earthly power doth then show likest gods when mercy seasons justice. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy, and that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. I've spoke thus much to mitigate the justice of thy plea, which if thou follow this strict court of Venice must needs give sentence against the merchant there.
My deeds upon my head. I crave the law the penalty and forfeit of my bond.
Wait, is he not able to discharge the money?
Yes, here I tender it for him in the court, yea, twice the sum. If that will not suffice, I will be bound to pay it 10 times o'er on forfeit of my hands, my head, my heart. If this will not suffice, it must appear that malice bears down truth. And I beseech you, rest once the law to your authority, to do a great right, do a little wrong, and curb this cruel devil of his will.
It must not be. There is no power in Venice can alter a decree established. 'Twill be recorded for a precedent, and many an error by the same example will rush into the state. It cannot be.
Daniel, come to judgment. Yay! Daniel. Oh, fine young judge, how I do honour thee.
I pray thee, let me look upon the bond.
Here it is, most reverend doctor, here it is.
Shylock, there's thrice thy money offered thee.
An oath, an oath. I have an oath in heaven. Shall I lay perjury upon my soul? No, not for Venice.
Why, this bond is forfeit. And lawfully by this, the Jew may claim a pound of flesh to be by him cut off nearest the merchant's heart. Be merciful. Take thrice thy money, bid me tear the bond.
When it is paid, according to the tenor. It doth appear you are a worthy judge. You know the law. Your exposition has been most sound. I charge you by the law, of which you are a well-deserving pillar, proceed to judgment. On my soul, I swear, there is no power in the tongue of man to alter me. I stay here, on my bond.
Most heartily, I do beseech the court to give the judgment.
Why then, thus it is. You must prepare your bosom for his knife.
Oh, noble judge. Oh, excellent young man.
For the intent and purpose of the law hath full relation to the penalty, which here appeareth due upon the bond.
A wise and upright judge. How much more elder art thou than thy looks?
Therefore, lay bare your bosom.
Aye, his breast, so says the bond. Doth it not, noble judge? Nearest the heart. Those are the very words.
It is so. Have you a balance here to weigh the flesh?
Oh, I have them ready.
Have by some surgeon, Shylock, on your charge to stop his wounds, lest he do bleed to death.
Is it so nominated in the bond?
It's not so expressly said, but what of that? 'Twere good you do so much for charity.
Well, I cannot find it. It's not in the bond.
You, merchant, have you anything to say?
What little. I am armed and well prepared. Give me your hand, Bassanio. Fare you well. Grieve not that I am fallen to this for you, for herein fortune shows herself more kind than is her custom. It is still her use to let the wretched man outlive his wealth, to see with hollow eye and wrinkled brow an age of poverty, from which lingering penance of such misery does she cut me off. Commend me to your honorable wife. Tell her the process of Antonio's end. Say how I loved you. Speak me fair in death. And when the tale is told, bid her be judge whether Bassanio had not once a love. Repent but you that you shall lose your friend, and he repents not that he shall pay your debt. For if the Jew do cut but deep enough, I'll pay it instantly with all my heart.
Antonio, I am married to a wife which is as dear to me as life itself. But life itself, my wife, and all the world are not with me esteemed above thy life. I would lose all. I sacrifice them all here to this devil to deliver you.
Your wife would give you little thanks for that if she were by to hear you make the offer.
These be the Christian husbands. I have a daughter. Would that any of the stock of Barabbas had been her husband rather than a Christian. We trifle time, I pray you. Pursue sentence.
A pound of that same merchant's flesh is thine. The court awards it, and the law doth give it.
Most rightful judge.
And you must cut this flesh from off his breast. The law allows it, and the court awards it.
Most wise and upright judge. A sentence. Come, prepare.
Tarry a little. There is something else. This bond doth give thee here no jot of blood. The words expressly are, a pound of flesh. Take then thy bond, take thou thy pound of flesh. But in the cutting it, if thou dost shed one drop of Christian blood, thy lands and goods are by the laws of Venice confiscate unto the state of Venice.
Oh, upright judge. Marked you, O learned judge.
Is that the law?
Thyself shalt see the act. For as thou urgest justice, be assured thou shalt have justice, more than thou desirest.
Oh, learned judge. Marked you, a learned judge.
I'll take his offer then. Pay the bond thrice and let the Christian go.
Here is the money.
Soft! The Jew shall have all justice. Soft, no haste. He shall have nothing but the penalty.
Oh, Jew, an upright judge, a learned judge.
Therefore prepare thee to cut off the flesh. Shed thou no blood, nor cut thou less nor more, but just a pound of flesh. If thou takest more or less than just a pound, be it so much that makes it light or heavy in the substance or the division of the 20th part of one poor scruple. Nay, if the scale do turn but in the estimation of a hair, thou diest, and all thy goods are confiscate.
A second Daniel, a Daniel Jew. Now, infidel, I have you on the hip.
Give me my principal and let me go.
I have it ready for thee. Here it is.
He hath refused in open court. He shall have merely justice in the bond.
Second Daniel, a Daniel still say I. I thank thee, Jew, for teaching me that word.
Shall I not have merely my principal?
You shall have nothing but the forfeiture. Take it at thy peril, Jew.
Then the devil give him good of it. I'll stay no longer question.
Tarry, Jew. The law hath yet another hold on you. It is enacted in the laws of Venice, if it be proved against an alien, that by direct or indirect attempts he seek the life of any citizen, the party against which he doth contrive shall seize one half his goods. The other comes to the privy coffer of the state, and the offender's life lies in the mercy of the dukes only, against all other voice. In which predicament I say thou standst. For it appears by manifest proceeding that indirectly and directly too, thou hast contrived against the very life of the offender, and thou hast incurred the danger formerly by me rehearsed. Down, therefore, and beg mercy of the Duke.
That thou shalt see the difference of our spirits, I pardon thee thy life before thou ask it. For half thy wealth it is Antonio's. The other half comes to the general state, which humbleness may drive into a fine.
Aye, for the state, not for Antonio.
Nay, take my life and all, pardon not that. You take my house when you do take the prop that does sustain my house. You do take my life when you take the means by which I live.
What mercy can you render him, Antonio?
So please, my lord the Duke and all the court, to quit the fine for one half of his goods I am content, so he will let me have the other half in use, to render it upon his death unto the gentleman that lately stole his daughter. 2 things provided more, that for this favour he presently become a Christian, the other, that he do record a gift here in the court of all he dies possessed unto his son Lorenzo and his daughter.
He shall do this, or else I do recant the pardon that I late pronounced here.
Art thou contented, Jew? What dost thou say?
I am content.
Clerk, Draw a deed of gift.
I pray you, give me leave to go from here. I'm not well. Send the deed after me and let me go.
Get thee gone, but do it.
In christening shalt thou have 2 godfathers. Had I been judge, you should have had 10 more, to bring thee to the gallows, not the font.
Sir, I entreat you home with me to dinner.
I humbly do desire your grace of pardon. I must away this night toward Padua, and it is meet I presently set forth.
I'm sorry that your leisure serves you not. Antonio, gratify this gentleman, for in my mind you are much bound to him.
So, we have just been in a court in Venice in 1590-something, I imagine. So I'd like to bring us back to the Sydney Opera House. Today, is it the 4th today of September? I think so. And I can't think of a better way to do it than this. I would like to acknowledge that we meet today on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. And I would also like to welcome you all here this afternoon to the session of mercy at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. We're asking, have we lost the quality of mercy? If we aim only for what is fair or for justice, as we've just heard Shylock asking for so vociferously and convincingly, do we narrow the scope for something better? Is there still room for mercy in a secular state? And to help me, and I'm Jane Caro and I'm the chair of this session, in this discussion, we have a unique panel, I would have to say. We have Germaine Greer. Oh, who, amongst other things, is a Shakespearean scholar and indeed has a book that she wrote on Shakespeare in the 80s. Is that right, Germaine? Which is still in print.
Yes, it has. It's had different titles from time to time. It started off as a past master in the Oxford University Press series. It's still Oxford University Press, but now they just call it Shakespeare.
Oh, there you go. And we also have, of course, Michael Kirby, who is a retired... who clearly needs no introduction to this audience, but is one of our legal experts in the room and who has sat in judgment in the real world on many an occasion. Please welcome Michael. And of course we have another legal expert, Deng Adut. Deng came to Australia as a refugee at the age of 14, and he is now a practicing lawyer with a practice in Blacktown in the western suburbs. And of course, he's the star of the University of Western Sydney's wonderful campaign. I used to teach at the University of Western Sydney. I'm very proud that 75% of their students are the first ever in their family to go to university. That's a hell of a thing. And also with us is A.C. Grayling. A British philosopher author of the Atheist Bible, and a man with much to say on many subjects. I look forward to hearing what he has to say about mercy. We are also joined by three of the actors we so recently enjoyed watching. Andrea Demetriades, who played Portia / Balthazar. Who we will hear from again at the end of this session. Also, we have Brian Lipson, who played Shylock. With such a combination of humanity and malice, I was lost in admiration. And of course, John Bell. Who was the Duke and is the elder statesman of Australian theatre. And only appropriate that he should be here with us this afternoon.
Less of the elder.
So I want to begin by asking Germaine. I know we're now in September the 4th at the Opera House in 2016, but what would this scene have meant to Shakespeare's audiences? How would they have seen the competing demands of mercy and justice? And how would they have interpreted Shylock's refusal to grant mercy and Portia's legal sleight of hand?
Well, I don't think you need to posit a completely different mindset because we're in the late 16th century. The way Shakespeare works is that he keeps shifting the goalposts, moving the certainties. So you start off, for example, thinking that Shylock is totally malicious. You're not helped terribly by Antonio's nastiness to him and threatening to spit on him again and call him a dog. Why has he ever bothered to call him a dog? And the Christians remain embedded in that loathing for Shylock, and they haven't actually been shown any... Nobody says what lots of people in England would have thought, that the Jews killed Christ. And nobody actually produces an argument for their contempt. The most important thing about Shylock is that he's an outsider. And so is Shakespeare an outsider. I mean, all the people who try to turn him into the Earl of Oxford are simply wrong. He was a man from Stratford who was surrounded by people with much higher pretensions than he had, and he was theatrical. But there's more to it than that. The Elizabethans did know Jews from the Old Testament, which is what they read. They said the Psalms every day. The Psalms are the highest expression of Hebrew poetry. But not only that, Shylock is a kind of Jew they'd never met. He's an Old Testament Jew. He goes to the synagogue. There were no synagogues in England. He is married to a Jewish woman. He refuses to eat pork. He is in Venice. That means that he's living in the ghetto under the rule of the Duke, and that as such, he is free to practice his religion. Now, no Jews in England were free to practice their religion. They were nearly all Maranos, and they were in Bristol and London. They were trading people. As long as they lived as if they were Christian and didn't make waves, they were safely ignored. But this is a different figure. This is like the confrontation of the Old Testament with the New. The New Testament is the testament of redemption, where we can repent our sins, where we can be saved. But the God of the Old Testament is a different being altogether. But we pray, forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Yet here we have the Christians refusing to do that, being obdurate, so that the play shifts in a scary way because we begin to feel anxious about what Portia is doing. And she is driving it too far. And we've got to a point where there's no way that there can be a reconciliation between Shylock and the Christians. We are now at a murderous impasse. hatred breeds hatred. And the way the play goes is we don't really know where the hatred began, and we certainly don't have any notion that it could ever end. The play is much less optimistic than people think. You know, Portia has been stupid. She has given a clue to a fortune hunter, Bassanio, that means that he can choose the right casket, so that she's upended her father's attempt to protect her. We know he's a wastrel. He's wasted his own money. He's wasted Antonio's. And now, pretty certainly, he's going to waste hers as well. So we want to believe that it's all happy and it's lovey-dovey and so on, but it's a deeply disturbing play. And there are no good people in it. I mean, it's the play that prepares for Measure for Measure. In Measure for Measure, justice and mercy come full circle, crash into each other. But it's worrying. I think Shakespeare's audience would have been worried. They might also, though, have been a bit confused because they'd never actually seen a Jew. But there's an interesting story of the man called Lopez, who was the Queen's physician. Lopez was accused of plotting to murder her. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered. But the thing that gets me of the barbaric nature of that punishment, and he was totally innocent. But the thing that got me about that was in the trial, he said that he loved the Queen as he loved Jesus Christ. And the people in the courtroom laughed him to scorn. Even though he was second generation, practicing Christian, married to a Christian woman with a son at Winchester, all they thought of about him was that he was a Jew.
And that comes...
Yes, but also I think it's very important to bring this forward to the 20th century. We're in the 21st, but in the 20th century, one of the most dreadful things happened in the history of humanity. And that was the killing of millions of people simply because they were Jews. And although we say that Christians have a different redemption view of morality, the fact is that it was that passage, it was about 7 words in St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 25, verse 6, when the Pilate is asked to release Jesus, and he says no. The multitude call out to take Jesus, and he then washes his hands, and they say, "Let his blood be on us and on our children." And those words were the basis in Europe, Western Europe, in some of the most civilized countries, to do such dreadful things. So there wasn't too much redemption there. There wasn't too much forgiveness. There wasn't too much forgiving our trespasses. There was, "Let his blood be on us and on our children." So that little rabble in Jerusalem brought down on the head of millions of people who happened to be Jewish the terrible fate that befell the Jews in my lifetime. And I think it's therefore, I agree with Germaine, it's got some horrible words in this which capture something that didn't just die out in the 16th century, that persisted into my lifetime and persists in various forms even to this day. And it's a reason why I think all of us have to be very careful with religion and with reading texts too literally. It's not just Old Testament people who read text too literally, it's also people of today. And there are people, probably including in this audience, who say that they can pick up texts of the Old Testament and passages in the New to stigmatise a group of people. They're not Jews, but they're GLBTIQ, gays. And that's still going on, and it's going on in our country. So let's fool ourselves that this is all Old Testament. This is the here and now, and it's got to stop.
So you're basically saying that in this secular age, not much has changed.
Well, where is it secular? I mean, it's secular to some extent. Our constitution is secular, but yet we've got people at this moment saying we've got to impose upon a minority in our society today an extra constitutional requirement of a plebiscite that is put in the way of the parliament of this nation doing what it's been elected to do, to decide matters and to interrupt the process in a way that's completely unacceptable. So it's not too secular.
No.
Not so secular. Not enough secular. We need
Not
to
enough
get back
secular.
to more secular.
With that one.
Well, Anthony, I think that's the moment for you to come in. Not enough secular.
Yeah, that's my cue, yes.
Yes.
Well, indeed, the great conversation about whether or not the concept of mercy is somehow embedded in religious traditions, and we see plenty of reference to it, of course, in the New Testament, other than in Matthew. We see it in the Old Testament as well. The Psalms that in churches are sung every day or said every day also have a great deal of reference to this. But, interestingly, the source of Portia's speech in The Merchant of Venice is actually an essay by Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, written in about 45 AD, almost word for word, where Seneca talks about the quality of mercy and how it's mightiest in the mightiest and so on. This was an essay written for Nero when Nero was a teenager and just become emperor of Rome. It didn't work very well initially, but Seneca was doing his best. He was trying to get the idea lodged in there. Didn't work out, but there it is. And that's in the classical tradition. Indeed, the classical tradition is rich in the idea of both components of mercy, because the concept of mercy has two aspects to it. One is forgiveness. So somebody has done something wrong and you forgive them because you want to be merciful to them. But the other aspect of it is compassion. And you might feel compassionate towards somebody, feel merciful towards somebody, even if they don't require forgiveness. For example, somebody fleeing torment and conflict and hardship and war, seeking somewhere peaceful where there are possibilities for their children. You might be merciful and compassionate towards them, even though it's not a matter of forgiving them at all. So those two sides of mercy were implicit in the idea of that great ethical tradition out of which Seneca himself came, and which, as I say, is the very root of Portia's speech.
Now, Deng, I see you nodding your head vigorously at some of the things that are being said here. How do you feel about the attempt to own mercy in the Christian tradition?
Well, for me, I'm completely different. I'm the most black man in this stage. So I will start first by saying, well, the Christian enslaved my people, so there was no quality of mercy that I find in the Bible. And also same equally with Islam, so there's no quality of mercy that I can find in those books. But I find the quality of mercy in a good book written by C. Grayling. So get yourself a copy. It's a good book.
Couldn't do better than that.
Yeah. So, when we talk about mercy, today in this country I see nothing. I haven't seen any mercy. We continue to lock up Aboriginal people in prison, 50% more than any other people in this country. So if we are good Christians, then we should release them because they haven't done anything wrong. Some of them were just locked up for stealing food, some of them for nothing at all. So I know that. That is quite true. If I'm wrong, go and look at the new report. So I don't see Shylock being wrong in being able to cut a bit of piece of flesh from the Christian, and I don't see Christians giving Shylock mercy because they trick Shylock. There was a trickery in that language, especially. Why would you say if you cut a piece of meat, piece of flesh in somebody and there would be no blood dropping from that, where would you get it from? So there was a trickery there. So the Jew man lost somehow, wonderfully, because he haven't cut a piece of meat in the person. But to truly see where everything goes wrong in Western philosophy and our learning, it's the fact that everything is not quite right. For example, you would say that the sun set and sun rise, but we know the sun never set and sun never rise. Am I right or wrong? So let's correct some of the things. Let's correct justice. Let's turn it to the point that we don't hate gay, we don't hate black people, we don't hate somebody who's Jew or Arabs. We still have that mentality. We haven't grown up, so there's nothing going forward. So I deny the fact that there's mercy in this country, unless we utilize it properly by looking at the rate of incarceration for the first people of this nation, and then I refuse to accept inequality of mercy coming from all of us until we do that.
Of course, there were passages which reminded an English audience who would have been watching this of the fact that they were looking at a scene in Venice and that they were looking at the law of Venice, and no one would have ever thought that in England, and it could not have been even in the 16th century, that you could cut a person and that you could take a pound of their flesh. So they were reminded by passages in Portia's speech about this is Venice, and that Venice is very strict on these things. And there would be a degree of self-satisfaction of an English audience saying, oh yes, this could never happen here.
Those barbarous Phoenicians, after they hung, draw and quartered Dr. Lopez.
Oh, let's not talk about a few punishments of that kind. They were sort of leftovers, but there are people, I've known people in the law who just love to have strictness. They just have to have the strict law. But fortunately, the English law evolved, the law of equity evolved to soften the English law, the English common law evolved with notions of reasonableness and fairness that allowed judges to soften things, and that is a good thing. Secular common law imported notions of, wouldn't have called it mercy, which is giving something extra, but would have called it equity and making things more equitable and fair. And there would have been a lot of self-satisfaction in that audience then, and no doubt now, well, this could never happen here. We would never have such a silly deed given force by law, and therefore there's an element of unreality in the enforcement of the law that I think an English audience would have known. But then they would have had the typical English xenophobic Brexit view. Well, that happens over there.
Quite right. But you know that there is a difficulty here that Portia spotted. She said if the Duke used his discretion to vary the application of the law, given that the law had been devised as something separate from the whims and choices and preferences of individual human beings, so that it could be applied equitably to everybody. And one great thing about the law is that it does take away from the possibility of the whimsy of individuals. How people are treated in society, and that is an impetus behind the law, which is of value. Now, the point is a good one, that the common law has built into it a certain flexibility, because people are appealing to precedent, but they're modifying it to circumstances. They're recognizing that case by case,
it's sort of built in. It's built in. We had a case in the High Court in which it involved a Catholic priest, and he had done wrong things with young people, and the trial judge sentencing him said, there is no good in you. You are not entitled to any regard to the evidence that came before the court, that he'd been very kind to people who had suffered bereavement, that he'd given help to people who had been ill and had very serious illnesses, and lots of other things. And his parishioners came forward and religious came forward. And the judge said, I'm not going to have any regard to that at all. Now, the court divided, and it was 3-2. And the three of us said, when you come to the judgment seat, you are entitled to have any of the good things you've done in life placed before the court, and you cannot say you will not pay regard to that at all. Now, was that mercy on our part? I don't think it was mercy. I think it was more due process, that when you come to the decision, the judges will take that into account and can't say, we're not going to take that into account. I'm not sure it was mercy, but it was a sort of reasonable, fair, and maybe merciful view that you have to take into account all the factors in coming to a fair and just and lawful outcome.
If I can ask you, when I was doing this play one time, I went to 2 different judges in Sydney and asked them their opinions on what Portia does. And their answers are a little bit simplistic, and I'm sure yours will be more sophisticated, but one of them said, Portia is absolutely right in what she does, because the law is there to protect people and protect life. And that's what she uses the law for. And whatever she does, however she twists it, she's fulfilling the spirit of the law. The other judge said she's absolutely wrong. She shouldn't be there. She's not even a man. She's not a lawyer.
Well, no,
she's a total imposter, and she's playing monkey tricks with the law for her own satisfaction, and she's quite wrong. So, 2 very different answers, but a little bit simplistic maybe. What do you think about those?
Well, I think it was a very dramatic moment, and as in many of Shakespeare's plays, the dramatic moment came at the right stage in the drama, at about 3/4 of the way through, and it's a really good little demonstration, a metaphor really of extreme rigidity in law and softening of law for the particular circumstances of the case.
I can't help thinking we're being really unfair to the Venetians. Here is this deed. I mean, why not? One of the things you could say is that you cannot make a deed for an immoral purpose. You could say that the deed itself was invalid. Indeed. But for all I know, it would have been the Venetian view as well. But it's not allowed to be the view in the play. It's not really Venice. It's over there. It's another place. And Venice had by far the most enlightened laws when it came to how to treat Jewish people. They had 5 synagogues in the ghetto. The first 2 were for Ashkenazim. We didn't have any Ashkenazi Jews in England until 1690s. And the reason given in the play is interesting. When they say we are a trading nation and we have to keep the credit of Venice, and Venice deals with people in a fair manner. It would have been much easier for anyone to say, presumably the deed had to be notarized or something. It wasn't just written on a piece of banana leaf.
It was legal.
They go to the notary.
No doubt a lot of money was paid to the notary to do this. But I think it is true that there is an element of stereotyping of the foreigners, and that's put into the passage by saying, well, this is Venice. And then you notice there was that very powerful argument, and you hear this often in courts. You can't do this because that will open the floodgates.
President.
Those old floodgates. Well, Sir William Dean, Justice Dean in Australia really gave that a good biffing in one case when he said, sometimes when the land below is parched and fallow, it's a very good thing to open. And boy, I saw a lot of parched land in my life.
I'm interested though too, and I think the scene we've just seen that does this really well, that it's easy to be merciful to, as Deng said, those people who have done nothing wrong. Where it becomes much harder is showing mercy to those who have done really terrible things. You were talking about that, I think, with your priest who came up for, I presume, terrible crimes. But it is often we hear, I was just told before I came on tonight, that the person who was convicted of killing the small boy Daniel Morecambe has had boiling water poured over himself in prison, which is a appalling thing to happen to anyone. But I can imagine, certainly because I like Twitter, I can more than imagine, that there will be people who will argue he deserved it because his sin was so great. Is it the test of mercy, or maybe even of civilization and of law, that is good law, that it can be applied to those who have done the very worst as well as those who have done?
You're not really tested when the person's a lovely old grandmother who's been nice and all her life, and she's just poisoned somebody, but I mean, in fact, you're only tested when you're tested when.
But if we're talking about mercy, we have to be talking about people who need to be forgiven. You don't extend mercy to people who haven't done something for which they could normally expect to be punished. And the problem here is that if you do have a legal system which is constantly forgiving people, and we used to have the system where there'd be an amnesty on certain important dates in the royal career, where everybody in certain categories of prisoner would be released, would
Presidents
be pardoned.
still do that, I think,
yes.
don't they?
So when we talk about mercy, that's really what we're talking about. And that raises a different question. If you keep weakening the sanctions against antisocial behaviour, you're actually weakening the power of the Crown, of the judiciary. So there's something to be said for, I mean, it's my impression, but I'm probably wrong, that what judges are meant to do is uphold justice. That is to say, interpret the law correctly and not worry themselves too much about whether it's kind or fair or any such thing.
Merciful.
No, I can't agree with that. Inbuilt in justice, the very word justice, inbuilt in that is taking into account many, many factors which will be softening the edges, and that's why the English law, a relic of empire, is still in operation in 44 countries of the world. I mean, it's because it had that malleability and maybe even uncertainty. I think you've been reading the Daily Telegraph too much. It's a big worry.
You know, I think that there is a problem here, which is that you sometimes get ideas that are very, very close to one another. They belong to the same family of concepts, and we can focus on one when really we mean the other. If you take the case of what's at stake in that scene in Merchant of Venice, it's about a contract. And it's about the state enforcing a contract and about the state having to enforce contracts because it's a trading state and it wants to, put a good front to the rest of the world that it always honors contracts. And it's not the state which is being asked to exercise mercy by suspending the proceedings and letting Antonio off. It's an individual who's being asked to be merciful. And what actually lies behind that is not so much about the application of the law and whether the law should be tempered by a merciful attitude, but instead asking of a human individual to be kind, to be more compassionate, to understand the consequences of something that they demand or that they press for. And this generalizes into the idea about how human beings should address one another, engage with one another in general terms. Fundamentally, and in the end, the deepest and the finest of ways that we can be compassionate towards other people is by giving them their margin. I remember once there was a case in London, in fact, about somebody being knocked off his bicycle by a passing motorist, and a case came up in court as a result. And the judge in that case said, every cyclist is entitled to his wobble. This is why, because he'd wobbled out in the path of the motor. Every cyclist is entitled to his wobble. Well, I think that applies to every single human being in every case. We're all entitled to our wobble, and that's why we should expect other people to be kind to us.
Yeah.
Deng, I want to go back to you because you were the person who mentioned refugees.
Yes.
And when we're talking about mercy, there doesn't seem to be a lot of it in evidence in Australia's treatment at the moment, particularly of the people who remain in detention on Manus and Nauru. And it seems to me that sometimes the law or issues that some people would define as justice are used to argue against showing mercy. That it seems that is an example of where justice and mercy are today being placed in opposition to one another.
Well, that's a good question. And Michael Kirby was a merciful judge, so let's just say that he was a very merciful judge, and I wish he could be younger again so that he would go back to the High Court.
I'm not old.
Well, they retire you.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of cases where I sometimes feel shameful when I see people riding on their back, say, go back to where you're coming from, and certain position where even sometimes somebody called me, when I say I was Australian, somebody told me in the legal system that I don't look like ordinary Australian. And the question is, how do ordinary Australians look like? I'm afraid ordinary Australians look like me, nearly look like me. Yeah, and the reason for mercy is always about humanity. You know, somebody who's a human like you, and they're running away from war. Their place has been destroyed. Think about Syria, where we're all involved. We're all involved in conflict in Syria. Why can't we welcome them? Why can't we just give them a hand? Why, until the country is over, the conflict is over. If we are able to do that, and then these people, they may have a chance of returning back to their home country one day by helping them. But to say, no, you can't come to our door, it seems like we haven't even answered the question that I say, how do ordinary Australians look like? We're just being hypocrites, and I don't like to be part of that hypocrite society. This is my country, it's your country equally, so we all should think about other people that need our help. We are global citizens. We tread everywhere. We go everywhere. Michael Kirby go everywhere to the High Court. So why don't we refuse him from going to other countries? Yes, because we seem to see the issues of refugee as something concerning. We look at them as invaders in general. Really, are they invaders or they're running away from conflict? And that is one thing that everyone should be aware of. They're not invading anyone. They're just coming with their hands open. And that is the seeking help.
Asking for mercy.
That's a mercy. They're asking for mercy, so give them mercy.
Actually,
That's what
I think they'd be pleased if they had justice. They haven't done anything wrong. They don't need to be forgiven.
They haven't done anything wrong.
Well, we had a case right on this point. It involved a decision of the family court which had held that where the Australian Migration Act said any person that comes to Australia without a visa can be put in detention. That was what was enacted during the Hawke government. And the family court said person means adult person, because if the federal parliament had meant it to mean a child, the Convention on the Rights of the Child says locking up children must be a last resort, therefore interpret person to mean adult person. And that seemed a sound argument to me.
Yes.
It was law. It was a little bit merciful law, but it was law. But then I was in the Titanic and a big iceberg was coming at me, and it was that in the Act it contained provisions for searching children in detention. And that could not be there if the theory of the Act was it didn't apply to children. And there were other provisions in the Act. And so in the end, this is one for you, Germaine, I said the Act is sufficiently clear. I have to give it effect. Let the injustice of this be on the Parliament of Australia which has enacted this, but my duty as a judge is to give effect to the law. And so the court was unanimous, and the little children were taken out of foster homes. They were taken back into the middle of the desert. Their parents gave up, and they were last seen going through the Khyber Pass back into Afghanistan. Heaven knows what happened to them. So there is a point where a judge in our system, in any system, has to give effect to the law if it's constitutional and if it's clear. But the law is not always constitutional, and it's much more infrequently clear. And that's where judges have the ability and the duty to bring values of compassion, understanding, and strictness in interpreting laws where they infringe on principles of decency and human rights.
But it would help if the laws had been properly drafted in the first place, wouldn't it?
Yes, but the draftsman would have said, and Justice McHugh in the High Court said, what's your big problem with the word person? Person means adult and child person. So the draftsman would have said, it's clear. But there is this principle, it's a relatively recent principle that says, if there is an ambiguity, construe it in favour of human rights. And that's a principle which I think is a good principle. It's one that I certainly endeavoured to apply.
Yeah, and I don't know if any of the audience here is happy to have their children locked up in prison. I don't know. Is anyone happy to get their children locked up in prison?
No.
It's wrong, right? So such a draftman is wrong. So the High Court was wrong in interpretation of the legislation that the child should be locked up equally with the parent, because that's moral wrong. Equally, there's no mercy in it. So I argue against such a law should be interpreted as ultra-virus.
Yes, but if you're sitting as a judge and it's been passed by the Australian Parliament and it's clearly constitutional, you can't just say, well, I don't approve that. That's not the rule of law. We've got to have the judges then, as Germaine says, give effect to the law. But boy, you can take out your magnifying glass and it's labelled mercy or fairness or human rights. You can look very clearly, and you can often find ambiguities which entitle you to interpret things. But we've got some horrible provisions in our laws directed at aliens. We had a case in the High Court of somebody who was a man of, I think, 38. He'd been in Australia. He was brought as a babe in arms, but he'd never taken out Australian citizen. He was a British subject, a British citizen, but he'd never taken out. So he was an alien. And so they could just toss him out. He committed some offences, and they could just toss him out. And Justice Gordon and I said, no way. But that was the law. Aliens, it was in the speech of Portia. The extra punishment because he's an alien, that's not something in Venice in the 16th century. That's Australia 2016. We've got some horrible laws against people who happen to be aliens, and many of them are really Aussies. They've just never regularised their passport.
Which brings me to the point, I think, that is also around the discussion of refugees, and is very much a theme, I think, in The Merchant of Venice, which is, are we less merciful to outsiders? Do we stop mercy when it comes to people we don't see as being like us? Are we less able to be merciful?
Everybody in an island is afraid that people are coming at the island. They're all coming in boats. They're all on their way here. It's true, I regret to say, of the Japanese. It's true of the British, and it sure is true of Australia. Anyone who's coming from across... We've got boundless plains to share, but we don't always extend our generosity to people who come from across the seas. They're aliens.
And on that point of being generous, can we be a little generous to ourselves? We want to be generous to ourselves, won't we? That demands judicial activism, such as yourself, in one occasion where you refuse to accept that the legislation was completely wrong. And we need that in this country in order for us to move forward. We can't move forward. We'll be just as backward as merchant of Venice in the 14th century.
It's actually curious in view of what's happened in Europe that one of the things the British were most annoyed about was the Court of Human Rights, and that they were being required by the Treaty of Rome to actually endorse rulings from that court. For example, it's not legal anymore, at least it will be when we return everything back to the Dark Ages, but it wasn't legal to slap your children. Corporal punishment for children was ruled out by the Court of Human Rights. The British shouted and screamed up hill and down dale, saying, "We demand the right to abuse our children." How can these foreigners
But Germaine, I got the cane. Well, I got the cane. I only got it once, but it completely warped my life. I needed therapy. I'd spilt some ink, and the teacher said, "This is the king's property. You have torn pages out of the king's property." Whoosh. That made me a very soft judge on matters of
Can I please just say that these, the British, there are some of the British who don't like the Human Rights Act. There are some of the British who are fighting like mad to keep it because our current Prime Minister is keen to get rid of it.
I see. You're not doing not all British, are you?
No. Not all British want to leave the EU. In fact, a minority of the British do. And certainly not all British want to smack their children. I got caned, by the way, practically all the time. It's certainly softened me up a lot, I can tell you. It tenderised me in all sorts of interesting places.
Well, I got tortured back when I was in the army, and it haven't softened me up.
But there is some interesting things about outsiders in The Merchant of Venice, and it is interesting to me that Portia comes and is the learned Balthazar, but the only way that she can get anyone to listen to her is if they think that she is a man. Otherwise, her voice would simply not have been heard. That's a remarkable thing for a playwright in the late 1500s to have the person who in one way comes to the rescue be a woman. Am I wrong?
I don't think it's remarkable because it had to fit in with Shakespeare's design of the irony of Portia being there negotiating. But the plain fact of the matter was every lawyer was a male. There was a provision in the Legal Practitioners Act.
It wasn't just lawyers, if I recall.
No, but I'm explaining why Portia had to be pretending to be a male, Balthazar, because even in Australia in the early 20th century, 1915 I think it was, a woman had got all the degrees, she got past everything, she applied to be admitted, and then they went to the Act and it said any person with qualifications. That's when they said person means male person.
It's nice what they do with person, isn't it?
Person means male person. It's always been thus, and that was how it was interpreted.
Yeah, but there are lots of plays by Shakespeare in which women cross-dress and become men, and they absolutely wipe the floor with everybody. And indeed, they don't even have to cross-dress and become men. I mean, there are all sort of plays where the women just do it anyway. Look at Love's Labour's Lost and so on. So the women always win the arguments in Shakespeare.
Hang on a minute, that's not true.
I didn't think it was either.
Look, the important thing is that the comedies are the plays that have happy endings, and they're the plays that mimic the structure of redemption. You die, you go to heaven, etc. So that the thing that's really interesting about the comedies is that the women are the movers and shakers of the action. It's when you get to the tragedies that the women become strangely inert and morally blank I mean, someone like Gertrude, who doesn't understand anything about her situation, can't understand what Hamlet's trying to say to her, promises she'll keep a secret, blurts it out immediately later, and so on. The tragedies are full of powerless and hopeless women, and the comedies are full of women who get things done. They're all played by boys, of course.
Yes.
It's a slight worry.
Yes.
Yeah, how about Cleopatra? She's a pretty feisty, tragic heroine.
She's also pretty fatal.
Yeah, well, it's a tragedy.
Yeah. Yes, but the thing, I mean, again, I mean, it depends how you read the play, but it's always seemed to me that what Cleopatra is an expert in manipulating male fantasy. She's a kind of human pornograph. And she's got poor old Antony completely fooled, but it can't go anywhere. It's still going to be destructive and sterile. But I wouldn't doubt for one moment she's of heroic stature.
Said you have an answer as to why the tragedies of women are powerless and the comedies they triumph. What makes that the chemistry?
I think it's really because of this notion of redemption and the fact that in the 16th century we have, according to plenty of historians, literary historians, you have the beginning of the ideal of companionate marriage, where your wife is actually a helpmeet, where you can't live a sensible life without being the head of a family, with a wife whom you treat decently, with children whom you bring up with a sense of responsibility. You need to be fertile, fruitful, industrious, and patient, and all of that.
Is this a Puritan?
Thoroughly Protestant. Puritan.
Yeah.
Puritan with a small p, absolutely. And that also places the sexual relationship between the spouses in the spotlight. It is what keeps them together. It is the cement. So you have a change from the sort of Catholic notion that virginity is better than married fidelity, and then you have the Protestant ideal, which I think Shakespeare is partly responsible for giving poetic form to. It wasn't around before that. We always think he was imitating some other kind of play, some other kind of marriage play, but he actually invented them. They're not out there. Most of the scholarly plays are about adultery and don't take marriage seriously at all.
But it's with great diffidence that I would dream of disagreeing with Germaine on anything to do with Shakespeare. Great diffidence in any subject. But I just thinking about Lear, Goneril and Regan, and Cordelia, thinking about the wife of the principal character in the Scottish play. I'm very keen not to mention the name of it. They're not like Gertrude and Ophelia, who are rather ciphers, I suppose. They have a certain determinedness to their characters, don't they? So does Desdemona.
I don't actually agree about that, because the whole point about Lady Macbeth is that she falls apart, totally, and can be of no help to Macbeth at all. He can't even be bothered to go to bed with her anymore. He's wandering around the stage while she's trying to get him to come to bed, and no. And Goneril and Regan, if you think about it, I mean, there are conversations at dinner tables all over the world about whether or not the old man should be allowed to drive the car. And the person saying, no, he's a danger to himself and other people, is a Goneril or a Regan. But they are actually demonized by the play. They're made to seem monsters of sensuality and deceit and disloyalty, whereas in fact they're just trying to control an old man who's become a problem for himself and other people. We demonize them. We turn Lady Macbeth into an ogre. These are all, in my view, distortions of the plays. It's not actually how the plays work at all.
So my point is just about
performance. Then you're talking about in performance they are distorted, and they're not written like that. Is that what you're saying?
Well, they're distorted in readings of the play. They're distorted when you cut your first third out of the play,
right,
because you're not going to run the whole 4 hours.
But you're saying in the writing of them, they are not demonized. They are reasonable likenesses and
they're definite
and compassionate portraits.
They're much more humane and much more human people than they are depicted in the sort of casual way that you refer to the play.
So are you saying, Germaine, that Shakespeare was more merciful to the women characters in his plays than current productions or any productions have been to them since, that there is more judgment.
Look, if you think about Ophelia, you know, Ophelia is always played as this sort of Coleridgean, floating, frail, nymphy type person. She's actually a total courtier. If you actually look at the way she talks, if you look at how disloyal to Hamlet she is, how she actually lures him into a situation where he's being overheard and he is in danger. And then what does she do? Her big achievement is to go barking mad. I mean, come on.
Do you think
and obscenely mad, by the way.
Yes.
In Merchant, is there enough in it to make a portrayal of Shylock as a human being with sympathetic and empathetic characters? There are at least two major passages. The passage, "Am I a Jew? If you cut me,
do I not bleed?"
And at the end, when he says, "Well, you know, you're taking everything away. How can I survive? And how can I make a crust?" There's that, which is actually quite modern, and if you transpose, say, an Islamic person and put in sympathetic statements, but it's still left to modern ears, to our ears, calling him Jew and making him convert to Christianity, which they would have thought was a great blessing to him, saving his immortal soul. But
the Venetian authorities knew better, because they didn't do it to them. They allowed them to build synagogues. There were no synagogues built in England in this time.
I would suspect that a lot of Shakespeare's audience were pretty sophisticated and would have seen that as a rather satirical and subversive thing. They wouldn't have necessarily acclaimed it as being a great thing that he was made a Christian. I think there were levels of audience understanding and appreciation.
But that's always the case, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. But I think if you don't play Shylock with a great deal of sympathy and understanding, then the play is very unbalanced. It should be, as Germaine said, a disturbing, challenging play, and you see someone who has a real case for his rage. He reminds me of a suicide bomber, someone who's just, you know, a terrorist. He's been pushed so far, he just won't take any more shit
But then you have to think what the theatre can actually do. I mean, when the play was revived in the 18th century, Shylock wore a bright red wig and a big nose, and he was a comic character, so that everybody could shout their insults from the audience to this guyed Jewish creature. But by then, in the 18th century, Jews were actually more likely to be seen on the streets of London. So
but they couldn't get away from the words, could they? I mean, they couldn't get away, "If you cut me, I do not bleed." I mean, those words were indelible in the text, and they were words that make you stop and reflect. Well, and I must compliment the performance of Shylock and of Portia in our production, and they really did bring out the subtlety of Shakespeare. There's a big move on now to have Shakespeare written in modern English. I hope that never goes anywhere. I hope it never goes anywhere. I think it's so important to have the subtlety, and I thought that was really well presented. I would have liked to have seen more of the actors in this panel.
But can I ask Brian? Brian, would you agree that you have to play Shylock with a great deal of empathy, if not sympathy?
Well, you have to play any character with a great deal of empathy, don't you? But bringing up the "if you prick me, do not bleed" speech is very interesting, because all that part of the speech is often quoted as a defence for the commonality of man. But the speech ends with saying, "Therefore, I will be vengeful. I will kill people if I want to," because Christians do it, everybody does it, and there is a commonality of man, and it's to do with hatred and revenge.
Yeah.
So it's a very so the portrait is pretty complicated,
and a bit thin.
And you can't really put him. you can't really call him a comic character or a tragic character or any of those things which you can usually apply to Shakespeare's characters, because he doesn't know what he is. He's just responding to this series of blows that happened to him throughout his life, and obviously in the play, particularly his daughter being running away and taking all his possessions. So he goes a bit mad, really, as most of the tragic characters in Shakespeare do. And as anybody does at times of extremis. And I suppose that's really what we're seeing. So he doesn't really symbolize anything. Well, he does, but that's not the main point. It's not that he symbolizes something, but it is a situation that any human being would respond to in an extreme way.
And is that the central part of mercy? That you see the complicated situations that all of us find ourselves in, what you, Anthony, described as the wobble?
Can I just say first...
We've got 38 seconds.
Okay, well, I'll talk fast.
Chair.
Just in connection with that very question, indeed, one thing that is very poignant about Shylock's position is the fact that his daughter leaves him, Jessica, and obviously he's tremendously stricken by that. But at the same time, he says, oh, my daughter, oh, my ducats, oh, my daughter, because, she's taken some money off with her as well. And at that moment, anyway, which is he more worried about, the fact his daughter's gone or that she's stolen some money? But actually, of course, you see later on in the scene with Portia, he is derailed a little bit by reflecting on the fact that he's lost his daughter. The humanity of Shylock comes out in those little marginal ways. And it's those tinctures of humanity that we capture when we encounter other people that call on us to be compassionate or merciful or kind towards them at our best if we can. I have to remember, too often, of course, we interpose between us and other people by putting ourselves and our own interests first there, which is why it's hard sometimes to be kind.
And we have finished on 0 seconds, which is always merciful to the chair. Could we please thank our panel, but we are not finished yet. Well, our poor little audience didn't get us to ask any questions. Now, I need to call the court to order because the young lawyer Balthazar has something else to tell us.
The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, an attribute to awe and majesty, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptred sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to awe himself, and earthly power doth then show likest God when mercy seasons justice. Therefore, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy. And that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy.